Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I am Green Huang, Director of PMI Taiwan Chapter, and I am going to chair this session. Today we are pleased to welcome Mr. Mark from Prosci. Mark is a senior consultant. He worked for over 40 countries over the world, so he has much experience to share with us. With this, I ask your attention to Mr. Mark and help me in welcoming Mark.
I also want to say thank you for being here this afternoon. The only language that I'm going to be able to speak today is in English, so I will try not to go too fast so that I can make it a little bit easier. We live at a really, really interesting time. We hear the word transformation. We hear the words digitization. Of course, during our conference, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence and IoT. But I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep to say, how is it that we put together our agile work methods along with this concept called change management in order to get better results from our projects? So, here's our objective. Whenever we have a project, some initiative, we're always trying to get some kind of an outcome. Maybe it's cost reduction, maybe it's reduced employee turnover, maybe we're trying to get a higher customer satisfaction score, maybe it's more revenue. How do we make sure that we're focusing on that while we're running our projects? And so here's the hypothesis. The goal is to improve our outcomes through driving adoption of the process, adoption of the technology, the new organization, the new behaviors. We're going to drive that through adoption and through our inclusive, iterative work styles that we typically call agile. And so our session this afternoon is how do we bring these things together in order to get better results? The question, when we use agile work methods, how do we get people to really want to adopt that new way of working? That's what we're going to spend our time on this afternoon. So it's agile plus change management. Now, normally, the session today, I'm going to look at the foundation of change management and a little bit of agile. I'm assuming you probably know that quite a bit. We're going to look at the similarities. What do agile work methods and change management have in common? We're going to look at some research that's been done on the topic, and then finally, how do we go forward? For those of you that know something about change management, some people would say it doesn't apply to an agile work method. And I'm going to say that's actually wrong. We can apply change management very effectively in an agile work method, and we're going to share some of the insights into how to make that happen. Now, normally, when we come to a session like this, we tell everybody to put their phones away. But I need your help. I want you to participate with me in our session this afternoon. For one thing, it's after lunch, and I don't want you to fall asleep. But if everybody would take out their phone and go to this website, polev.com. You can use your tablet or your phone, and I want to get your input. How much expertise do you have on change management, and how much expertise do you have in agile work methods or agile project management? If you're strong at both, touch your screen in the upper right. If you don't think you know much at all, touch your screen in the lower left. So once again, if you could go to this website, polev.com/ADKAR. I'll give you a moment to pull up that website. Love to get your input to the question. There we go. A few people have figured it out. Just by touching your screen, you can put in your input. So I'll give you another moment to respond. Right now it looks like we have a lot of variance. Some people don't know too much about either topic. Some people think they're experts in both. So it should be a really interesting discussion this afternoon. Very good. I thank you for participating. Now I have one more for you. Think about your organization, your company, or the university or nonprofit that you work for. How skilled is the organization in change management as well as agile work methods? Looks like a lot of people don't think their organizations are very skilled at agile work methods. Pretty interesting. Well, thank you for participating. At our company, we do a lot of webinars where we have up to 1,000 people participate. And I asked this question recently, and your results are actually pretty similar. When I asked this question in a webinar, about 38% said they were pretty good at change management, but not agile. About a third of the group said they were strong in both. But just like you, very few felt like their organization is overall strong or very capable in the area of agile project management. So we're going to talk about bringing these two things together for the rest of our time today. Now what I'd like to do as we begin is to compare traditional or waterfall project methodology and agile approach with change management. So you probably have a project methodology similar to this in your organization. These are the key phases. Maybe you have 5, maybe you have 7, but your methodology is probably similar. And when we are on a project, that's the way we think, right? We think, are we in planning? Are we in discover? Are we design? That's how we think. But I'd like for you to, for a moment, to consider the people who are impacted. How is it that they think about the projects that we're putting in place? Well, they have a current way of working. As the project becomes more mature, we're going to go through a transition, and then there's the future way of working. That's the mindset of the people who are impacted by our projects. So that would be very true for a sequential or waterfall project. Think of a building or a bridge or anything like that. There's a go-live date, and it's very, very specific. Let's think about how we do this in an agile work method now. From a project team perspective, we still have our initial planning, but then with our Scrum teams and our releases, we're going to go through discover, design, develop, and deploy multiple times, correct? Now once again, think about the people who are impacted. Their view is also that we have a current way of working, but multiple times we're going to go through transition, future, transition, future, transition, future. And then finally there's a desired end state. So now as we think through our technical work and how people respond to those changes, how are we going to get these people to effectively utilize these new ways of working again and again and again and again? That's what we're going to be spending some time on this afternoon. My proposition to you is that we have a unified value proposition a way to bring these two disciplines together to achieve better outcomes. So I like to describe the technical things that we do as focusing on designing, developing, and delivering something. Maybe it's software, maybe it's a process, maybe it's going through a Kanban workshop. We're trying to come up with something. That's the technical work. Now, when we focus on the people side of change, we're thinking about embracing it, adopting it, and using it. These are complementary disciplines that we need both of them in order to get the results that we want. So once again, current state, transition, and a future state. If we do both of these well, hopefully we're going to get the outcome and the results that we want. Now, once again, this looks more like a waterfall approach, doesn't it? Very sequential. Now what we want to do is think through, in an agile work method, what does that start to look like? Well, transition, future. Once again, designing, developing, delivering, embracing, adopting, and utilizing. Again and again with every change that we release. This is a quote that I really, really like. This is about 50 years old. It was from the 1960s. And Vince Lombardi is an American. But what he said is, the achievements of the organization are the results of the combined effort of every individual. Now that's very true for a sports team. He was actually a coach on a sports team. But of course it's also true in our organizations that we work with. We can roll out the best ERP system or CRM system, or we can focus on developing agility or even digitization efforts, but our results are actually the combined efforts of every one of us working. If I choose to do it the new way, and Johnny says I'm not going to, we're not going to get the results that we want. So that's how we're going to continue our discussion on Agile and change management. I'm going to come back to this for a second. I just said that ultimately the results that we want are the combined efforts of each individual. This is the organization view. When we have a project, we tend to think of things like customer service will be impacted, finance will be impacted, manufacturing will be impacted. And those are all true, but reality is, it's people. In my very simple example, I'm showing a project that impacts 25 people, right? So they have a current way that they're working. We said we're going to take them through a transition, and ultimately to that new way of working. What happens when we start our transition if some people say, I don't like that, I'm not going to be the expert anymore, I don't like that new way of working, it threatens me, or I'm scared, maybe I don't like the technology, or I'm afraid that my job's going to go away. All of a sudden those people are not going to be very enthusiastic about that new way of working. And all of us looks like we're not going to get the results that we want. Now, after we release it, what if some more people say, that technology is too tough. I prefer my spreadsheet. I don't like putting data into Salesforce. I don't like the new lean process. It doesn't make sense to me. If our results are the combined effort of every individual, we're nowhere close to what we built our business case on. Okay? Once again, that looks like a waterfall approach. Now, let's look at that from an agile approach. Once again, we've got the same group of people, but they're going to be going through this multiple times. Again, and again, and again, and again. The interesting thing is, when we do work in an agile approach, we are actually impacting the people multiple times, correct? We've been doing a lot of research into how effective are projects. And according to the research that we did last year, 78% of organizations say they are reaching saturation. They can't handle more change. There's too many initiatives and projects. The interesting thing is, I like Agile from a development perspective, but maybe from a people impact perspective, it's actually making our challenges even harder. because they're seeing so many more changes much more frequently. So we have to be very aware of that as we're putting together our plans and our processes. The founder of Prosci, his name is Jeff Hyatt, and he put together this saying many years ago. The secret to successful change in an organization lies beyond the visible and busy activities, right? It's not about engineers, it's not about project managers, it's not about communication specialists. Ultimately, we're focused on having one person change at a time. And that's what change management is all about. How do we have every person who's impacted go through that transition into that new way of working in an effective way? We've put together a model. You may ask the question, how do we know if somebody's making that transition? When we put together that new organization, that new product line, that new process, how do we know if every person is going to make that change? Well, we've put together a model. It's a very simple model. You can remember it. ADKAR, ADKAR. Here's what it stands for. Awareness. Awareness of the reason that we're going to change. If I don't understand why my company is asking me to change, I'm probably going to resist. I need to know, is it beneficial for the organization, for the people, for the customers? Why is it that we're doing that? And if we were speaking in English, I would know that people are moving through the process when they say, I understand why. The second step is focusing on desire. Am I choosing to participate? That is the most difficult thing of all with complex human beings, impacting our desire to want to do something. But there are some techniques that we can use to help people prepare for and want to participate. You see things like, I've decided to, I'm going to, I will try. Then you know that we've reached the desire state, the A and the D. Now here's the challenge. I've been on many, many projects over my career. It was mentioned I've been in over 40 countries, 25 years of experience. When we have projects and we're getting ready for that go-live date, what do we typically do? We send people to training, right? We have to educate them on how to do work in the new way. Well, the problem is, if they aren't aware of why, and they don't want to participate, sending somebody to training is a complete waste of time. Has anybody here ever been sent to a class and you go, I have no idea why I'm here? Yeah, exactly. Everybody can relate. Okay? So after we work through awareness and desire, now we can train people, and then we have to give them the right skills, time, tools to actually develop the ability. Once again, if we think about using a new tool in the shop floor, and somebody has to learn how to operate within a robot environment, are they an expert the first day that it shows up, even after they went through training? No, it takes time. And one of the things that we frequently don't do is give people enough time to develop the expertise. And then finally, we have to reinforce it. You've probably read self-help books that say it takes 30 days to develop a habit, something like that. The same is true in our work environments. When we're implementing changes, we have to reinforce the behaviors, the action, the skills that we want. We put all of those together, and those are the changes that every person that we're impacting has to go through. Remember I had my block of 25 people? We have to think about how Andy and Becky and Charlie and Danielle each are going to make that transition. Now, does it work in an agile environment? I think the answer is yes, absolutely. But we have to think about it a little bit differently than we would in a waterfall project environment. Once again, coming back to my simple waterfall methodology. Pretty sequential, we get ready for the go-live date. Now here in Taiwan, when you have a major project, everybody's going to know 2 dates. You're going to know the kickoff date, you're going to know the go-live date, right? That's when everybody has pizza or beer or whatever kind of food you want at the end, right? We all celebrate. But the reality is, in most cases, we actually haven't achieved value yet. We have the potential for getting value because we have the solution designed and delivered, but until people use it, we really haven't accomplished much. So I describe it as aligning A, mad car, but it's not the first A, it's the second A, ability, aligning ability with go live. If that's our plan, if that's our need, now we have to back up. We have to make sure that we're working on this long before the go live date. The awareness, working on the desire, then getting ready for the knowledge and ability closer to that go live date when they're actually getting ready to use it. And don't forget the reinforcement. One of the mistakes that I frequently see when I'm working with clients across the globe is that we have a project team, we get ready for the go live, we maybe have a short period of sustainment, right? But usually it's way too short, and we don't give the people the opportunity to really be successful. Our project teams are assigned somewhere else. We shouldn't be surprised if we're not getting the results that we want. Okay, so once again, traditional waterfall sequential methodology, that's the way it looks. Now if we do that within an agile environment, we still have to plan on awareness and building desire at kind of the entire project level. Once again, why is this important to the organization? Why now? And what happens if we don't? Focusing on the desire. I know Casper over here. Maybe Casper is going to feel threatened. Maybe if we're going to a new work location, he's going to have a much longer commute and he's not going to be excited about it. Maybe he's going to get a different manager. Maybe he's going to have different performance measures on his performance worksheet. All of those things can impact his desire to participate. So we need to think about that at the project level. But then with each release, we develop the skills and help that person go through the ability. So those are the things that we're going to go through multiple iterations. Awareness and desire kind of at the beginning as we're trying to have people understand why and why now, and then developing their skills with each subsequent release. And we need reinforcement activities if we want this to become the new norm, the new business as usual, the new skills that people can do repeatedly. Let's look at it a little bit different way. At a project level, we're going to focus again on awareness and desire, but then with each sprint, with each release, we're going to primarily focus on the knowledge and ability within some reinforcement at each release and sustainment activities overall. How do we do that? What are the activities that we need to do if we want to be effective at this? Well, we've put it together into 5 levers, 5 components of a good change management plan. The first one is a sponsor roadmap. How do we help our executives, our leaders of change, do a good job of leading that change? I won't have time to go through it in detail today, but we have something called the ABCs of being a good sponsor. It's be active and visible, build a coalition, and communicate directly with employees. So we have to put together our sponsor plan to help them do their job effectively. Of course, good communication plan. One of the interesting things that we've learned in our research about communication for projects, the people who are impacted really don't want to hear from the project team. They really don't want to hear from a communication specialist. They want to hear from either the sponsor or their direct manager. Too many times we make the mistake of having the project team do the communication, and what we've learned through research is people kind of ignore it. They don't put much validity into it. So we need a good communication plan. We need a good coaching plan. Having those managers and supervisors and subject matter experts really be in place to guide people through that transition. Yes, of course we need a training plan. And those are things we're typically pretty good at. And then as I mentioned, we need a resistance management plan. I was using Casper as my example. How are we going to help each person We're going to identify where the likely areas of resistance are, and how do we help them through it so that we get the results that we want. Now, I mentioned ADKAR, and I said if we really want to get the results, we have to focus on how each person, I used Andy and Becky, Charlie and Danielle, how do they go through that transition? So these plans that I just mentioned, they focus on different areas of ADKAR. Our sponsor plan focuses on awareness, why, the desire, helping people understand why it's important, and on reinforcement. Our communication plan is primarily on awareness and reinforcement. Coaching impacts everything because it's one-on-one. It's unique to the people who are going through the project or that are being impacted by the project that we're putting in place. Training is primarily on knowledge and ability, and that's why we make a mistake if the only thing we do is put together a training plan. It doesn't address awareness, it doesn't address desire, and it doesn't help with reinforcement. And then finally, resistance management. These are the things that go into a good change management plan. Now once again, can we do this in an agile environment? Not just in a sequential waterfall. And I think the answer is yes. We just have to adapt it a little bit. We have to think a little bit differently. Here's our generic waterfall approach again. I mentioned these are the areas that each of the plans address or that impact. So if that's the areas within a waterfall plan, we just have to think a little bit differently when we're using Scrum teams with various releases. Our sponsors are going to primarily be effective at the project level because they're looking at the big picture. Why is it that we're doing it? Why now? And what happens if we don't? Our communication plan is effective both at the project level as well as at the individual release level. As we get into coaching and training, it's going to primarily be at the individual release level. That's because we're getting into the details. And then our resistance management plan, I would say, is both at the project level as well as at the individual release. Now, does this start to sound like a lot of work to you? It doesn't have to be, but it can be structured and organized. So, just a little bit different picture again, in terms of how do we put these together at the project level and the individual release level when we're doing agile work. So, the takeaway that I have is that change management and agile can work very well together. We have similar outcomes, and we can do it, we just have to think a little bit differently than in the traditional way of either projects or of change management. The parallels. Let's get into a few of the details of agile, and how does that work within change management? There's a quote, "We're not so different, you and I." And I think that's true with agile work methods and change management. I'm sure all of you in this room are probably familiar with the Agile Manifesto that's been around for almost 20 years now. But let's look at how does this impact or work well with change management. I would say there are 4 value drivers, if you will, of agile work methods. Focusing on interactions and individuals over processes and tools, focusing more on working software than comprehensive documentation, collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change versus following a very defined, rigid plan. Most people in here seen these before in terms of the agile value statements. I think they work very well with change management. Once again, change management is focusing on how do individuals go from that current state through the transition into that desired working state. I was going to have you fill out a poll here, but maybe in the interest of time, I'll come back to this one. I'll share the results with you right away. How does this work with change management? Well, as I said, departments, functions, organizations don't change, it's the people, one by one. That works very well with an agile environment. Second one, too much focus on documentation isn't effective. That's one of the tenets of agile work methods. Well, similarly with change management, we're focusing on adoption and usage, not whether or not it's officially documented and released. Individual change impacts what we need to be defined, and that allows us that flexibility to learn as we go, as we're measuring how each person is going through that change. And as I just said, individual change is unique. If all of us in this room were being impacted by a project, we would probably respond in different ways and at different rates. Some of us would be those early adopters. We would pick it right away and say, I want to do this. Some would be a little bit slower. Some would be hesitant. Some would say, maybe. So we're talking about adopting at different rates. And that's why they have to be flexible and fluid and learn how to work with each individual. So let's look at a couple other similarities between agile work methods and change management. Those of you who are agile certified would know that there are 12 areas here, the 12 principles. I'll share a couple of these things with you in terms of the parallels or similarities with change management. You can read them on the screen. We're going to focus on adoption and usage. Works very well with customer satisfaction. Accommodating changing requirements, well, that's what the individual change is all about. If I go on to the second page, working software is the primary measure of progress in an agile work environment. Well, when we think about that from change management, it's whether or not each person, to use my example before, is Andy and Becky, and Charlie and Danielle, are they using the software effectively? Not whether our release package is perfect. Ultimately, we care about whether or not they are using it effectively. So, I think there's a lot of similarities between the Agile Manifesto, which has now become a very common way of doing work, and change management. Let's look at some research. If there isn't some research to back what I've been saying, maybe you like my speech this afternoon, maybe you don't. But if we have data that shows how it's working, that's when I think it truly becomes valuable and important for each of you. In 2017, so about a year ago, we did a survey on how people are using change management within agile techniques. We had about 400 participants across the globe who shared their experiences with us, and we've been able to put those together into a plan. So we looked at two things. We looked at applying change management in an agile project environment, and we also looked at organizations moving to an agile environment. Those that have been very waterfall or sequentially driven, what was their experience like in going to an agile methodology? I'm not going to have time to spend too much time on part 2 here today. If you'd like to learn more, I'll gladly share it with you over another time. One of the key questions we asked when we were doing this research is, what kind of projects are you applying agile work methods to? I think the assumption is that the majority of them are software driven. And you can see of the 400 or so participants, yeah, many of them were IT projects or IT projects in their organization, but certainly not all. So this is where, again, I'd like your participation. Can you go back to that website? What type of projects do you apply Agile on?
Very good.
In your environment, what type of projects projects do you apply agile work methods on? Looks like primarily IT, but not exclusively IT. And I think that's a pretty interesting statistic. Your results are kind of similar to the benchmarking that we did when we were conducting the research. In the interest of time, I'll keep moving on here. Of the 400 participants in our research, as I said, majority were working on IT projects. But here's the part that I thought was pretty interesting. In those organizations, had they completely adopted an agile work method or partially? And you can see that it was really partial. Almost 3/4 of the organizations had partially adopted agile work methods. Only about 1/4 of them had all the way. In this research project, we also crossed many different industries. So it wasn't only financial services, or only government, or only consulting. There was a pretty broad spectrum of who participated in the research. It was also pretty broad in terms of the size of the organizations. Some of them were quite large, but you can also see that many of them were less than 1,000 employees. So I think it was a good cross-section of industries and size of organizations that helped provide the data. Overall, the study looked at, in an agile work environment, what are the greatest impacts, contributors, obstacles, and so on in providing adoption and usage of that new way of working. We also looked at the move to an agile work environment, and what were the things that were really important for success in that environment. Like I said, I'm not going to have time to go through those in much detail today, but it is a really, really interesting read if you'd like to get some more information. You can get a summary at our website, or I'll be glad to share it with you as well. There's about a 12-page summary that you can read there that I think you might find insightful. So what have we learned through putting together this research on doing change management in an agile environment? Anybody like Stephen Hawking? Really, really smart physicist? Controversial, maybe. Anybody know what that says? Well, intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. And you can see that it's a simple substitution. Numbers for letters. So adapting to change is our ability to move forward with intelligence. So let me share some highlights of how to apply change management in these new methods. The one that I want to mention first is that here's the great irony. Probably the most surprising statistic we learned in our research is when we're doing an agile project with all of our Scrum teams and releases, we actually have to do more change management up front if we want to get effective results. I think everybody assumed that you would defer, you would delay your change management until closer to the releases. But the 400 survey respondents said they actually got better results and that they needed to do more change management up front. Secondly, let's talk about contributors to success. Looking at a typical sprint cycle of 1 month, maybe 2 months, similar to the previous results. Early involvement of a change manager, someone who's focusing on adoption and usage, really led to greater success, more so than what we anticipated. So that was a key contributor to success. What are the obstacles that we learned about? You can see on the top there was a quote from one of the participants. There's a tendency to be less strategic when we're in agile work environments, which is really not true. We have to plan when we're doing agile work as much as we have to plan in sequential. It just takes a different form. One of the greatest obstacles to success that this group responded was that when people didn't understand how to drive adoption and usage, they ran into great resistance. And that was hard to overcome if the team didn't understand what that meant with every release. types of accommodations or adaptations did we have to do with our change management in order to work in an agile work environment? Well, this one's not surprising. We needed to do more iterative, more adaptive change management. And what would people do differently? If they got to start their project again, what would they do different this time than before? Ironically, the groups that were participating said they needed to do more education on Agile. And when I think about the organizations that I've been a part of, that's frequently true. We'll have our project teams be very knowledgeable about Agile, our project managers, our developers. But if the people who are impacted, and if our sponsors don't understand it, there's going to be a lot of confusion out there in terms of why are we doing this now and how many times and what are the expectations. And so educating all of those who are impacted on Agile work methods was something that they wish that they would have done more of. So how do we do this then? These are 10 practice areas in doing good change management. I've mentioned some of those already here today. And what would we do different? Well, the complete research document that I referenced goes into much, much greater detail. Let me highlight a few of those for you today. As I just mentioned, our sponsors, those business leaders or IT leaders that are driving this, if they don't understand what to expect in an agile work environment, we're probably not going to be successful. And so that's one of the things that we've learned that we need to focus more on. Secondly, middle manager engagement. I was talking with one of the conference participants yesterday, and we were talking through how difficult it is sometimes to get managers to fully embrace those new ways of working. It's because in many cases they're being threatened. They don't know what their role is going to be like in the new environment. One of the things that we say is you have to treat managers as an employee first, and then as a manager. Meaning we have to look at how is that manager being impacted, what is he or she expected to do different, and until we help them through that, we can't actually expect them to lead others through change. And employees must be engaged more, but also less formally, which impacts our communication and our coaching plans. From an approach perspective, if we do change management, of course, we're going to have to align it to the agile work methods. Our resource needs are going to vary. They're not going to be as consistent. There's probably going to be more ups and downs based on the timing of the releases, the complexity, the scope, and the impact. And from a change management perspective, we should begin our integration with project management earlier. Start even earlier in that project lifecycle than we would with a waterfall approach. From a communication, we have to be precise. We can't have vague comments or generalities when we're going in an agile environment because we're helping people go through at a very specific pace and cadence that we have to get them ready for. Training is going to have to be more focused and delivered more frequently. The agile projects that I've been a part of often don't comprehend that. We think, oh, if we release something every 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever our pattern is, people will just be ready for it because it's smaller. Well, the great irony is we have to prepare them more frequently and give them more specific advice on what this is going to be like. We still need a resistance management plan. Remember the chart that I showed at the beginning that said, here's the 25 people impacted by my hypothetical project. We still have to think through them as individuals and help them through each journey and release cycle. And we have to begin our reinforcement early. So, kind of in summary, driving adoption and usage in an agile environment is very possible, but it requires that our change management plans have to be adapted and taken a little bit different format. So, kind of in summary then, I think the core of change management can apply equally well in a sequential waterfall approach or in our iterative release cycles that we go through in Agile. Agile and change management have a lot of parallels because we focus on the individual and we focus on adoption and usage more so than following a specific structure and cadence. The research has given us additional insight into what is effective, where the obstacles are, and how to adapt our change management plans. And we can do that. It requires our change management to match the pace and cadence of the releases that we go through from project management. That's what I have for you this afternoon. I hope you found it valuable and insightful, and look forward to connecting with you all through the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Do you have any question to Mr. Mark?
We have about 5 minutes left if anybody would like to ask questions.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Mark, could you give us some example and practice example and the effect of the agile management?
Example, I'm sorry.
Example of the
Already used
change management.
Let me come up with a good one right at the top of my head. What's interesting, I'm going to give you an example. Now, originally, when the Agile Manifesto was put together in 2001, we tended to think of large, complex software development. But nowadays, we tend to do more packaged releases, correct? And so, what I think of today is actually an example that I was helping a client with where they're implementing a new CRM system. But what they were choosing to do is to release the capability every couple of weeks, basically to turn it on or to make those processes resident in the software. We had to do a lot of coaching of the individuals because otherwise the salespeople stopped using it, right? They weren't entering their opportunities. They weren't putting their contacts in, which made the whole downstream less effective. So when we do it in an agile approach, it tends to be more one-on-one, and we can do it in smaller chunks, which means that our change management becomes more focused, and we're helping people through, let's say, a week, rather than having to go over a longer period of time. Does that kind of answer your question?
Question is that, how would you know your change management strategy or your methods is not working?
Good question. How do we know it's not working for our change management methods?
Before it is too late, right?
Yes. The earliest place to identify it is how resistant are people to the change, even the concept. I was going through this a little bit before you came in terms of if people understand why something is coming on board, A, in this model, you're going to start to see them then move into, do I choose to participate? You can observe that long before you go live. Are people asking good questions like, how do I do this? What's the impact to me? Or do you see a lot of negative questions of like, I can't do this, or I'm going to go talk to my friend over here and we're going to stop. But you can usually identify that early on, and that's really what we encourage the project teams and the sponsors to look for, especially the sponsors, to be looking throughout the organization. I call it building a sponsor coalition. So you may have someone, let's say in manufacturing, driving a change, a new initiative. But it's probably going to impact customer service and logistics and warehousing and all of these groups. If that manufacturing sponsor isn't working with all of those leaders to gain buy-in, you're probably going to get some real pushback when you come out to warehousing or logistics or customer service.
Thank you for the speech. I strongly agree that you have to put all the members into this change management process. But how do you gather all the people? Like along the way they might quit, but how do you take them back and then, like to follow your strategy?
Yeah, really good question. I know I have like 1 minute left before my session is end of time.
No problem.
But what we do, so when we encourage people to develop a change management plan, we look at all of the impacted groups, kind of like to your question, finance and HR, manufacturing, customer service, etc. And then we look at how are they impacted. For example, finance group may be impacted very differently than customer service, might be impacted very differently than manufacturing or IT. So we look at the degree that each group is being impacted and how. Is it their job? Is it their systems? Is it their tools? Is it their processes? Are they going to get a new manager? Are there job requirements? Are they having to relocate? We look at 10 different components of how people are impacted. Based on that, we can anticipate where the resistance is going to be. And then you try and address it proactively. So,
No more question? No, it's time up. Thank you for Mark. Now, as I know, Prosci is promoting methodology at the top. So, Prosci is very generous. So you can use one name card to trade this book only today. So if you can use one name card to trade this book. If you want to learn more, you can contact with the Teammates company in Taiwan. Another PMI Taiwan want to show our sincere appreciation to Mark.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.